I never expected a single evening out to change my entire life, but that's exactly what happened. At the time, I was just another exhausted guy in finance. My weeks blurred into endless spreadsheets, meetings, and late-night takeout, but I had a ritual to keep myself sane. Once every couple of months, I treated myself to something nice. Sometimes it was a weekend trip, sometimes it was new tech, and this time, I wanted an experience, a night at one of the most exclusive restaurants in the city. This wasn't just any restaurant. It had a reputation like a crown jewel. Critics called it the Cathedral of Fine Dining. Influencers posed on the velvet couches beneath chandeliers dripping in crystal. Reservations took weeks, sometimes months, and the average check could buy you a used car. But I had saved. I had worked. And I thought, why not? I deserved one night where I wasn't just the guy crunching numbers behind a desk. So I booked my table, pressed my best navy suit until every crease was sharp, polished the only pair of leather shoes I owned, and even bought a new tie just for the occasion. The night arrived, and I remember standing outside those glass doors, staring up at the glowing sign. My stomach fluttered with nerves, but in a good way, the kind of excitement you feel before stepping into someplace you've only ever seen from the outside. The lobby smelled faintly of jasmine and expensive cologne. A grand piano played softly in the background, and the staff moved like dancers, their uniforms crisp, their steps deliberate. For a brief moment, I felt proud just to be there, like I had earned my place. But then it happened. The maitre d' spotted me, and something in his expression shifted. His eyes scanned me like I was merchandise, pausing on my shoes, my tie, and finally my face. He smiled, but not the welcoming kind, more like the kind a wolf gives before it shows its teeth. "Good evening, sir," he said, his tone smooth but distant. "Do you have a reservation?" "Yes," I replied, handing over my confirmation with a small smile. "Under Alex Carter. 7 o'clock. He glanced at the screen, nodded, then leaned in just slightly. "Sir, I'm afraid our establishment has a very strict dress code. We cater to a certain caliber of clientele. I don't believe your look is appropriate for tonight." My brain stalled. I looked down at myself. Pressed suit, polished shoes, silk tie. Everything about me screamed formal. "Excuse me?" I asked, thinking maybe I misheard. Behind him, a couple waiting to be seated turned to glance at me. The woman's lips curled, as if she was suppressing a laugh. "You're not saying I'm underdressed?" I pressed. The maitre d' lowered his voice, though not enough to spare me from being overheard. "It isn't about the clothes themselves. It's the presentation. Our guests expect a certain refinement. I'm sure you understand." And that was it. No clearer explanation, no offer of an alternative. Just a smug dismissal wrapped in polite words. I stood frozen, humiliation clawing at my chest. I wanted to argue, to demand a manager, but my throat tightened. The laughter from the couple behind me stabbed deeper than any insult. My ears burned hot, and every second I stood there felt like an eternity. Finally, I muttered, "Fine," and turned to leave. As I walked out, I caught his voice again, low but sharp. "That suit probably came from a thrift store." Someone nearby chuckled. That night, I didn't eat. I didn't even go home right away. I walked through the city streets, neon lights reflecting in puddles on the pavement, my stomach empty but my head burning. The humiliation was raw, but underneath it, something else began to stir, anger. Because it wasn't about food anymore. It wasn't even about being turned away. It was about how they made me feel. Small, worthless, beneath them. Like I didn't belong. And that feeling, that boiling mix of rage and shame, was something I couldn't shake. I didn't know it then, but that was the night everything changed. That was the night I swore I'd never let them have that kind of power over me again. The next morning, the humiliation still clung to me like smoke after a fire. I went through the motions: shower, tie, coffee, train, but my reflection in every window carried the same echo: a certain caliber of clientele. That phrase wasn't about fabric or shoes. It was a dagger aimed at who I was, a verdict that I didn't belong among people who thought their worth came from crystal glasses and foie gras. By lunch, I couldn't push it aside anymore. I opened my phone and scrolled to the restaurant's website. Their official dress code was laughably simple: jackets preferred after 6 p.m. No athletic wear. Nothing about caliber, nothing about refinement. I had followed the rules. They just didn't want me there. I took screenshots. I didn't know what I'd do with them, but something inside told me this wasn't over. That afternoon, I texted Sam, an old friend from my finance days who had moved into commercial real estate. Me. Quick favor. Can you pull tenant info for La Belle Maison? Sam. The Cathedral of Fine Dining? LOL. Why? Me. Call it professional curiosity. He agreed to meet me after work. We sat in a noisy noodle bar a block from his office, chopsticks clicking against bowls. Sam opened his iPad, pulled up records, and gave me a grin that said he'd found something juicy. Lease signed 6 years ago, he said, sliding the screen across. Peak market rates. Rent escalations every year. And here's the kicker: 2 UCC liens filed in the last 12 months. Equipment financing and vendor debt. They're bleeding. I scanned the numbers. My finance brain clicked into gear. High rent, overdue payments, suppliers banging on the door. This wasn't a cathedral, it was a castle of glass ready to crack. You're saying they're vulnerable? I murmured. Sam raised an eyebrow. Alex, don't tell me you're thinking what I think you're thinking. I didn't answer. Not yet. That evening, I walked past the restaurant again. Through the wide windows, I saw the maitre d'. Same perfect posture, same smug tilt of the head. He smiled at a couple as if he were bestowing blessings. For a second, the memory of humiliation twisted in my chest. But then it changed. Not pain. Not shame. A spark of something else. Resolve. The next few days became reconnaissance. I read online reviews, not the glowing 5 stars but the middling ones, the 3-star confessions. Food excellent, service cold, great view, felt judged, pretentious staff. Patterns emerged. The food was consistent. The problem was culture. I called Nadia, a consultant I knew who had once run operations for a Michelin-starred place. I need eyes inside, I told her. A secret diner who can read a floor. She laughed. Tonight. Tonight. That evening, she sat in their corner booth, blending in with elegance. Between courses, she texted me updates. Bar understaffed, cocktails delayed. Server dropped entree on wrong side. Hostess laughing at a guest's suit. Finally, food solid. Soul rotten. Her verdict was clear. Prestige on the surface. Rot underneath. The next morning, Sam introduced me to the landlord, Kapoor Properties. On a video call, Mrs. Kapoor appeared with calm eyes and shelves of books behind her. We prefer stability in our tenants, she said after my polite introductions. What if I told you stability is exactly what I'm offering? I asked. She tilted her head. Hypothetically. Hypothetically, I said with a small smile, your tenant is drowning. Hypothetically, I have the resources and the plan to turn that space solvent again. She folded her hands, thoughtful. Then hypothetically, We're open to further discussion. When the call ended, I stared at the blank laptop screen. The crack had widened into a door. That night, I couldn't sleep. I scribbled notes in my phone: suppliers, staffing, training, cash flow. This wasn't just fantasy anymore. The numbers worked. The weaknesses were there. If I moved carefully, if I struck at the right moment, I could do it. The maitre d's smirk replayed in my head. But now it wasn't a wound. It was fuel. This wasn't about getting dinner anymore. This was about owning the table they refused to seat me at. Over the next week, the staff learned very quickly that the restaurant wasn't going to be the same. I wasn't the kind of owner who sat in an office counting profits. I was there, almost every night, watching, listening, making notes. The waiters were polite, nervous at first, but it didn't take long for me to realize something important. The problem had never been them. It was the management. The smug man who had humiliated me wasn't just rude to me, he was toxic to everyone. One night, after closing, I gathered the staff for a meeting. They shifted uncomfortably, probably expecting some new set of impossible standards. Instead, I leaned against the bar and asked a simple question. What's wrong with this place? For a moment, no one spoke. Then one of the younger waitresses, barely 20, blurted out, "Him. The manager. He treats us like garbage." Others nodded quickly. Stories spilled out, of schedules changed without notice, tips skimmed, verbal abuse when a mistake happened. He had built his authority on fear, and everyone hated him for it. I listened carefully, arms crossed. Finally, I said, "That's all I needed to know." The next day, I called the manager into the office. He strutted in, still trying to wear the mask of confidence, though it was cracking around the edges. "You wanted to see me?" he asked stiffly. I slid a folder across the desk. "This is your termination notice. Effective immediately." His eyes widened. "You can't just." "I can." I cut him off. And I did. You see, I don't run businesses on arrogance. I run them on respect. And you made the mistake of humiliating the wrong man in front of an entire room of strangers. That decision just cost you your career. For a moment, I thought he might argue. But then his shoulders sagged, his jaw clenched, and he snatched the folder without another word. He stormed out of the office, slamming the door so hard the frame rattled. The silence that followed felt perfect. I walked back out into the dining area, where some of the staff had been waiting anxiously. I smiled and said, "He won't be coming back. From now on, this restaurant is about two things: good food and respect for everyone who walks through that door, whether they're in a $1,000 suit or a hoodie." The staff broke into quiet cheers. For the first time, I saw genuine relief on their faces. And me. I sat at the very same table where I had once been refused service and thought, revenge really does taste better when it's served on a silver platter. But I wasn't finished yet. I had one last plan, a way to make the humiliation come full circle. 2 weeks later, I decided it was time for the final act. Firing the manager was satisfying, sure, but it wasn't enough. He had humiliated me in public, and I wanted his downfall to be just as visible. So I arranged a little event. Nothing huge, just a relaunch night for the restaurant under new ownership. Invitations went out to food bloggers, influencers, a few local journalists. I wanted the place buzzing, lights flashing, cameras rolling. And of course, I made sure an invitation found its way into the ex-manager's hands. When the night arrived, the restaurant glowed like it had never before. The staff, happier than I'd ever seen them, moved like clockwork. Guests snapped photos of the dishes, praised the atmosphere, posted stories online. Then, halfway through the evening, the front doors opened. And there he was. The ex-manager. His suit wasn't as polished this time, and his face was set in a bitter scowl. He probably thought he could waltz in, reclaim some dignity, maybe convince people the restaurant had collapsed without him. Instead, he walked straight into a trap. I stood up, lifted my glass, and called for attention. Conversations hushed, phones tilted toward me, waiting. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, "thank you for being here tonight. Some of you may know this restaurant had a bit of a reputation before. Not for its food, but for its arrogance. Guests were judged not by who they were, but by what they wore." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Phones were definitely recording now. I let the silence linger before continuing. "Well, I'm here to make one thing clear. Under my ownership, everyone belongs here. Whether you're in a suit, a dress, or a hoodie and sneakers like mine." Laughter and applause erupted. I smiled, soaking it in. Then I added, voice sharp as a blade, "And the man who once believed otherwise." I paused, letting my eyes lock on the ex-manager standing frozen by the door. "No longer works here. Consider this his final performance." All eyes turned to him. Some guests gasped, others smirked. A few even laughed, the same kind of laughter I'd heard directed at me weeks ago. Only now, it was aimed at him. His face went red, then pale. He opened his mouth, but no words came. The humiliation was complete. He spun on his heel and stormed out, the doors swinging shut behind him. And just like that, the crowd broke into applause. For me, for the staff, for the rebirth of the restaurant. I raised my glass again, my heart pounding with satisfaction. That's it, I thought. That's the justice I was waiting for. But little did I know, owning the restaurant was going to change my life in ways I hadn't even expected. After that night, the restaurant wasn't just buzzing, it exploded. Photos of me standing in my hoodie with a wine glass raised went viral on local foodie blogs. Headlines read, "New owner flips elitist restaurant into inclusive hotspot," and "Hoodie guy wins, the revenge that became a business." People loved the story. The rich tech guy kicked out for his clothes, then bought the restaurant. Narrative spread like wildfire. Overnight, the place turned from a struggling, pretentious lounge into the city's new favorite dining spot. And honestly, running it became addictive. I'd come by after work, sit with the chefs, taste new dishes, and ask the servers what needed improving. I wasn't just some absentee investor, I was in the trenches with them. And because of that, the staff respected me. They worked harder, smiled more, and guests could feel the difference. One evening, as I was helping carry plates back to the kitchen, the same young waitress who had first spoken up in that staff meeting stopped me. "You know," she said, "this place feels safe now. We don't have to worry about getting screamed at for little mistakes. You have no idea how much that means." Her words hit me harder than I expected. What started as revenge was turning into something bigger. I wasn't just humiliating one arrogant manager, I was building something people actually cared about. Of course, not everything was smooth. The ex-manager tried to stir up trouble online, posting rants about how the restaurant had lost its standards. But instead of hurting us, it backfired. People mocked him in the comments, calling him Mr. Dress Code and the doorman of elitism. Meanwhile, reservations skyrocketed. Tables were booked weeks in advance. Food critics who once dismissed the place as shallow suddenly praised the heart and authenticity it now had. And I couldn't help but laugh every time I walked in wearing the same hoodie that had once gotten me kicked out. But success came with irony too. The restaurant that once saw me as not good enough was now attracting exactly the kind of people who had laughed at me before. The flashy crowd, the influencers, the shallow status chasers. The difference. Now they were the ones begging me for a table. And I made sure they got one, right next to the kitchen doors. I should have known the ex-manager wouldn't just vanish quietly. Men like him don't take humiliation well. And sure enough, a month after his public disgrace, he came slithering back into my life. It started small. Anonymous bad reviews on Google claiming, the new owner doesn't respect fine dining. Fake one-star ratings popped up in clusters. But I'd spent years in tech. I knew a troll farm when I saw one. I traced the accounts back easily. All him. At first, I ignored it. The restaurant was thriving, and most customers laughed off the fake reviews anyway. But then he got bolder. One Friday night, as I was greeting guests, I saw him standing across the street, arms crossed, watching. Like a vulture circling, waiting for something to die. The staff noticed too. Whispers spread. "Is he allowed to be here?" One of the bartenders muttered nervously. "Let him watch," I said, keeping my voice steady even though my stomach twisted. "He's looking at something he'll never have again." But of course, he didn't stop there. 2 weeks later, he marched right through the front doors during dinner service, ignoring the host stand, ignoring the line of guests waiting to be seated. He headed straight for me, his face red with anger. "You think you won?" he hissed, leaning in so close I could smell the cheap cologne. "You humiliated me. You ruined my career. I'll destroy you for it." The dining room froze. Forks clinked against plates. Conversations died mid-sentence. Every eye turned to us. I smiled, calm, steady, the same way I had the night he first kicked me out. Only this time, I had the power. "Funny," I said, raising my voice just enough for the room to hear. "Because the only thing you destroyed was your own reputation. I just gave you the stage." Scattered chuckles rose from nearby tables. A few guests even pulled out their phones. The ex-manager's face twisted, realizing he was once again being turned into a public spectacle. Security, real security, not his imaginary version, arrived moments later. 2 tall men in black ushered him out while he shouted empty threats, his voice cracking under the weight of desperation. The doors slammed shut behind him. The restaurant erupted in applause. And me. I raised my glass, grinning. "On the house," I told the nearest table. "Dinner's on me tonight. Consider it a celebration of persistence." The staff laughed. The guests cheered. And somewhere out there, the ex-manager's rage boiled hotter than ever. But I didn't care. Because what he didn't understand was simple. I hadn't just taken his job. I had taken his power. And I wasn't about to give it back. After that dramatic scene, I expected the ex-manager to finally get the hint. But no. Some people can't accept defeat. They thrash around until they drown. A few weeks later, one of my lawyers forwarded me a letter. The ex-manager was suing me. His claim: wrongful termination, defamation, emotional distress, a laundry list of nonsense. He wanted money, attention, revenge. I almost laughed reading it. The irony of him crying about emotional distress after he'd spent years humiliating others was delicious. Still, lawsuits are never fun, and he clearly thought dragging me into court would scare me. He had no idea who he was dealing with. I didn't just fight back, I went on the offensive. My legal team dug into his past employment history. What we found was a goldmine: complaints from former staff, customers, even a harassment report that had mysteriously disappeared. I wasn't just defending myself anymore. I was building a case that showed the world exactly who he was. When the court date came, the room was packed. Journalists had picked up the story, and people wanted to see the hoodie guy versus elitist manager showdown. The judge called the case, and within 10 minutes, the ex-manager's smirk was gone. My lawyer presented documentation, witness statements from my staff, even testimony from ex-employees at other restaurants he'd poisoned with his arrogance. By the time my lawyer was finished, the ex-manager wasn't just losing the case, he was exposed as a fraud, a bully, and a liability. The judge dismissed his claims with prejudice, meaning he couldn't file again. Worse for him, his little stunt made the news. Headlines the next morning read, "Former restaurant manager loses lawsuit, history of abuse exposed." His career over. His reputation in ashes. And the best part, he had done it all to himself, trying to chase me down. That night, I sat at my restaurant's bar, sipping whiskey, watching the staff laugh and serve a full house. The ex-manager had once told me I didn't belong here. Now he didn't belong anywhere. It's funny how life works sometimes. A few months earlier, I'd walked into that restaurant just looking for a good steak. I left humiliated, treated like trash because of a hoodie and a pair of sneakers. Now, I walked in every night as the owner. The staff smiled when they saw me. Customers raised their glasses in greeting. The same tables that once laughed at me now whispered about the legend of the hoodie guy. But the real satisfaction wasn't in the headlines or the money. It was in the small things. Watching a server beam when a guest complimented their service. Hearing laughter from tables instead of pretentious silence. Seeing ordinary people, families, students, workers still in their uniforms, enjoying a meal without fear of being judged. I had turned the restaurant from a stage for arrogance into a home for everyone. That was the real revenge. As for the ex-manager? Last I heard, he was bouncing between odd jobs, his name toxic in the industry. He had tried to destroy me, but in the end, he destroyed himself. One evening, as I sat in the same corner booth he once refused to let me near, a waiter asked if I ever regretted it. Buying the place, spending so much time on revenge. I thought about it for a moment, then smiled. Regret it? No. That man gave me humiliation for dessert. All I did was send it back to the kitchen, and serve it properly. The waiter laughed, walked off, and I leaned back in my chair, hoodie sleeves rolled up, sneakers tapping against the polished floor. For the first time in a long time, I felt completely at peace. Because in the end, revenge wasn't just sweet. It was profitable. And oh, did it taste better than any steak on the menu.